Vikings general manager Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and head coach Kevin O'Connell had their season-ending press conference today. We'll give our thoughts on that right after this. After a very eventful Minnesota Vikings season, gave us a lot of good moments, a lot of bad moments, a lot of questionable moments. It brings us into an offseason where there's a lot of hope, but there's also quite a few questions. Some of those questions were today addressed by general manager Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and head coach Kevin O'Connell in their season-ending press conference. So we decided we kind of picked a few things that they had talked about, a few little interesting nuggets. Obviously, with these, they never actually really say anything. They say a lot of words without actually telling you much, but that's just kind of GM and coach speak. But there were a few interesting tidbits we could take away from this.
Yeah. So we kind of came up with like our 5 takes from this. And like Casey said, they kind of beat around the bush on a lot of these questions. Of course they are. But with some of them, you were able to kind of be like, all right, we can, especially one guy in particular, we can kind of see where they're going with this. And at least our guess of how we interpreted this video, and what we think they meant or where they're going with it, trying to, be our best Sherlock Holmes in this. But so we're going to jump into that. But before then, I want to thank everybody for watching the GG Sports podcast. We got a lot of content coming this off season. It was a hell of a ride of a regular season, came to a disappointing end. But luckily for us, it was a fantastic first year by Kevin O'Connell. And and I love Kwesi. Even watching that video again, like you forget about how special Kwesi is because you don't see him throughout the entire season. The last time we really heard a lot from him, at least, was before the season started. So we really like him, and we know our organization is good hands. So that's always exciting. So thanks again, everybody, for watching. Hit subscribe if you're new. Hit the bell, get notifications of our videos, especially because at least every week. We don't know how we're going to do in the off season, but we're definitely going to do it this Sunday at 11 a.m. Central. We will be going live, and we're giving away a Justin Jefferson rookie card, something we've been doing all week or all year long. Show up there. That's why I hit the bell, get notifications for this video, pop in, talk to us. We'll have a good time, and you might have a chance to win this card. Once again, hit subscribe, and let's jump into the rest of this video here.
All right. So the first thing that they talked, or the most notable thing they talked about, the question that's on every Minnesota Vikings fan's mind, is what's the plan with defensive coordinator Ed Donatel? Now, of course, as we talked about, they say a lot without saying much in these things. So the question came up basically right away. Chris Thomason asked, do you guys see Ed Donatel remaining defensive coordinator? And Kevin O'Connell gave the beat around the bush answer, but if you really dig deep into it, I think you can tell which way he's leaning, because he said they're still in the evaluation phase. So it's my job as the head coach. Is I need to constantly evaluate. I need to see where we can be better, and what we need to do to improve. He didn't necessarily. There wasn't an indication that he was going to say no, he's not going to be here, but he also never said yes. And he's 100% right, especially with the way this team is constructed. They talked a little bit about that transition from the 4-3 to the 3-4. He said he felt like there's, they made strides, but there are still some players who obviously have been playing in a 4-3 defense for a while and need to try to make the adjustment. So he said they're looking at all of that. They're looking at, he mentioned scheme as well as personnel and how they can make that a better combo going forward to get that full phase of the all 3 phases working together. But near the end of the press conference, something that I know I picked out of there, and Jamie noticed it too, is he talked about all 3 phases. He mentioned special teams. And when he said special teams, we made really good strides with special teams. And going forward with Matt Daniels as our special teams coordinator, I think we're going to be able to get this to greater heights. So, and then when he mentioned defense, he never said names. And obviously he's the offensive coordinator. So it really does feel like, from the small comments he made about still evaluating, plus where he thinks the special team is going to go, it really feels like he gave you his answer to this. And I don't know. It's interesting. It was interesting.
Pretty much any of the players, it was pretty obvious. Anyone that's going to stick around, and we'll get into some more of these players soon here. And anyone that's sticking around, it was very obvious, yes, this guy's going to be around for a while, whatever. And then with Ed Donatel, he's kind of the only one where they're oh, we'll make a decision on that in the near future, whatever. So it just, that kind of gave it away that I don't think he'll be around, which it makes no sense for him to be around. I don't think any fan expects him to stick around for next season after, a heartbreaking loss like that.
Right.
with a guy that everybody knew probably should have been gone earlier in the season. I knew that would never happen, especially when we had like 10 wins at that one point when people were doing it. But at this point, you probably wish you kind of did pull the trigger on something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. 'Cause I think
So
that
it's just obvious that it should happen.
right. I think they had also asked if they thought that if they felt the defense kind of threw away what could have been a special season with how the other phases of the ball were working in. Just kind of the same thing. They said, yeah, we're still evaluating that, how we can be better. And Kevin O'Connell just kept
Right,
saying, like, that's
right.
my job as the head coach to figure out ways that I can get that and make the championship football a standard and not just
Yeah.
1 year
Oh,
thing. So,
I love Kevin O'Connell's leadership. There's no like he is self-accountable to the extreme level, and you gotta love it. But sometimes you just want him to be like, Ed Donatel, that was his fault.
yeah,
He's got to go.
right,
That's why everyone else is just screaming it. But of course, from a leadership standpoint, you got to take accountability,
right.
which of course he is the head coach. And ultimately it was their decision. They could have moved on from him earlier. That is, I can't imagine being a first year head coach and trying to make that kind of decision. So, I definitely don't blame him for that, but there is definitely something not working with our defense
Right.
and Ed Donatel. So
Yeah, obviously, for sure. Next big point they talked about is there is a question about a contract extension for Minnesota Vikings star wide receiver Justin Jefferson.
and they weren't so sure about it.
Nah, yeah,
They were
yeah,
sure
yeah.
about
They
it.
were they
They
were
were
pretty
sure
sure about it. I
about
mean,
it.
obviously, you don't want to tip your hand as a general manager, and if you want to kind of go look at it both ways, Justin Jefferson, when asked on Sunday or Monday, like, do you want to be here long term? He said, "I'll be where I'm wanted." So
We
and then
want
with
them.
with Kwesi not straight up saying like, "Oh yeah, like we need to make sure this guy gets signed, or we're definitely going to start working on that." It's the gamesmanship. But he also did say when like they said, they talked about salary cap, which we'll get into in a little bit here. They mentioned trying to fit Justin Jefferson underneath that salary cap, knowing he's going to get a record-breaking deal. And Kwesi at Open Mensa,
Yeah.
he used this phrase before, considered what he called a champagne problem, which
Right,
is a
right.
good problem to have, having the
Yeah,
best
yeah. I was
receiver
just
in
gonna mention
football.
that. I love how he went with that. Like it's not a problem. Like because they're considering it like, oh, you have to go through this Justin Jefferson issue. Like, what are you gonna do? And right away, Quesi's like, what do you mean you're gonna do? Let the champagnes pop now
Yeah,
because we're re-signing him and he's gonna be the
right.
richest wide receiver in NFL history. And
Yeah,
that's just that. So as far as from this video, the confidence of we're gonna try to do whatever we can do to get that deal done for Justin Jefferson long term, it's going to happen,
yeah,
or at least we're going to try our best.
right. I mean,
Hopefully, Justin Jefferson feels the
yeah,
same way, which
and
just
this
sounds
guy's
like they
done
have the
things that
best.
no other receiver has done his first 3 seasons. Obviously, he went from 1,400 to
Insane.
1,600 to 1,800 yards.
Like
The
what?
2,000 was kind of thrown off track
Next year, baby.
with the way the defense has played him at the end of the year. So
Right.
obviously, and that's Kwesi said there has been initial conversations. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
Adam
Mm-hmm.
Schefter tweeted out there that there had been no talks yet, but they're going to happen this offseason. I don't know who to believe. I would believe it out of Kwesi's mouth. He said, it's like he said, there have been those initial conversations. And for the people that want this team blown up and to start over and to make 2023 a wash, then you obviously want Justin Jefferson gone because he isn't. Yes, his saying he wants to win might just be he doesn't want to seem like a diva, but obviously money is important. I mean, that's why you play the. I mean, that's part of the reason why you play the game. You make a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
doing
Mm-hmm.
it, and with how good he is, he's worth every penny. But at the same time, like this kid wants to win, and you can tell he's
Oh
he's
yeah,
a competitor and he's got that
definitely.
fire.
After
He
that
wants
Packer
to,
game,
right. He
this guy
wants to
wants to
win
win.
football games. So if
Yeah.
you're gonna say no, we're just gonna take 2023 off and kind of go from there, he ain't gonna buy it. He's not
No.
gonna be in on that.
No.
So, but I mean, but obviously, yeah, Justin Jefferson is gonna be a big deal. They need to get him resigned, at least get parameters of a deal in place, and then work out the rest of the salary cap issues
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as you will. But obviously, from their comments, it's pretty obvious that they know the importance
Oh
of
yeah, and it was the easiest question they had to answer that entire interview,
right.
100%. And also, they you could tell they really love their trade for T.J. Hawkinson, and
Mhm.
I'm in on with them on that.
Yeah, for sure.
He's young.
Yep. And that's
We're
kind of
gonna
what they had said too, which I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into like the salary cap and stuff like that
Mhm.
and kind of what they can do to fix that because they did talk about that a little bit. So we'll talk about that in a
Yeah.
little bit here. Speaking of extensions, they were asked a question about quarterback Kirk Cousins, who came off Statistically, not one of his best seasons, but if the way he played and kind of the things he
Right.
did this year, non-depending on how you feel about the last play of that game against the Giants, like
Right, right,
Kirk
right,
Cousins
right.
balled out this year, man. I mean, he
Yeah,
threw some
100%.
interceptions, sure, but we were all saying if you're going to be aggressive, that's fine, which he was. Obviously 29 touchdowns, what I think like 4,400 yards or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they was all in big spots, 8 game-winning drives. But the big question that came up was, you extended Kirk Cousins 1 year last season. Will you do it again? And Kwesi's answer to that was, we expect Kirk Cousins to be our quarterback in 2023. As for extension, we will have to kind of see how things play out with that. We'll have to talk to his camp. Obviously, again, not saying or saying a lot of words without saying much, basically saying like he's going to be our quarterback going into next year. We'll evaluate every other avenue. And obviously, Kwesi being a Wall Street guy, evaluation's huge for him. So him saying that is no surprise that he's not going to commit to anything now and just kind of let the chips kind of fall as they may. But I
Mhm.
mean, obviously, going into 2023 with Kirk Cousins as your quarterback, with the way he played this year, I'm 100% for it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that should deter them. If there's a guy they like in the draft, going after him, I don't think it'll be a first rounder, but you take quarterback every year just because. But it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do with Kirk. I mean, obviously, if you extend him, kind of flush out some of that cap down the road, you can alleviate some of the concerns you have. But I mean, Kirk Cousins was not the reason that this team didn't go any farther
No. And I want to
overall.
say, from my opinion, I would say, after that last throw from Kirk Cousins, I didn't really know how I'd feel. If anyone who's watched me on here, I've mentioned they would probably understand where my opinions on Kirk Cousins was, and then how important it was for me to see him prove what he's been doing all season long in the playoffs, which he kind of did in that first game up until that last play. But since then, I still feel like I feel a lot more confident with Kirk Cousins than I did
Wow.
going into this year.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's an elite quarterback or anything like that, like some people might say, but I do feel more confident. I think this was his best year. You got to see him make comebacks over and over again, other than the last game, which does suck. But if you ask me, if this was a year where someone offered like an insane trade, obviously there's a Kirk Cousins no trade. There's no way we trade Kirk Cousins this offseason. I can't see it in any way. But if there was like a trade we couldn't refuse, I would probably take it, just because I don't even know. I don't even know why. We'll go into that more in the off season.
Right, for sure.
But anyways,
That's a big conversation we could have, but we'll
yeah,
save
yeah, we
that
have a
for
lot of
another day.
conversations. So,
Right.
anyways, it does from this video, it just felt like Kirk Cousins is definitely not going anywhere in this offseason. And if I was going to put money on it from just the way they sounded and stuff, my guess is that he probably will get at least another year. I 1 year extension I'm good for. What I'm not good for is us going into this draft or something and not getting another young quarterback to play behind him. I think with Kirk Cousins being 35, if he plays 2 more years, he'll be 20 or 37. I definitely think you need to get someone behind Kirk Cousins and who can learn from a guy like Kirk
Right.
Cousins.
But
So I
also,
think regardless, I'm hoping that we get something. As long as you like them or whatever, I'm hoping that we get something.
yeah.
Otherwise, I'll be kind of a little ticked if we go in the season without a young guy that has some sort of potential. Other than
But
like,
also, we only have 5 picks, so it might be tough.
well, I don't know, trade out of the first round
Well,
for next year's first round, trade
that
everything you got to go up to get Caleb Williams next year,
maybe.
and then I'll be happy.
But that leads us right into actually the next conversation is, this is an older picture, Xavier Rhodes in the background. It's not the point. The point is
This is a
veterans,
picture of vets.
veteran / clearing cap space. That was brought up as well. They asked Kwesi about how he felt about the roster construction. He talked about speed of the game. He talked about the salary cap. I mean, I've
Mhm.
seen a couple different things. I saw one source said we were 8 million over. One source said we were like 19 million over, something along those lines. And as we saw, and Kevin O'Connell, they asked the question about, is the NFL getting faster? Do you guys feel on defense you just weren't fast enough? And he said it's becoming a lot more of a spread game, to where you do need a little bit more speed. So maybe alluding to the fact that some of the guys are a little older, and obviously they were out of place in the 3-4 scheme. But we just saw it just in general, like I talked about on our live stream last Sunday, with that
Mhm.
the 3 big, like Kendricks, Hunter, and Smith all missing a tackle and allowing a first down. It's just, I hate to say it, but especially in order to alleviate cap space, I think we're going to see some of those guys go. Obviously, there's some stuff going on with Adam Thielen right now, that it's really not feeling like he's going to be here. Eric
Mhm.
Kendricks, I think it's a pretty safe bet. He'll be gone. Daniil Hunter, and as we talked about with
I
those
don't know
draft
about
picks, you have tradable assets on this team. So if you trade away a Daniil Hunter, and if you can get a first round at the very least a second round pick for him, I think you would do that, and it alleviates some cap space. So I mean that is a big thing if you want to help yourself draft and develop. You can trade for more picks as well as alleviate some of that cap room and extensions. If TJ Hawkinson, they mentioned him. They have him under contract for his 5th-year option, which is quite a bit of money. They could extend him, convert some of that into a signing bonus, push some of that money out down the road a little bit, which might be a good call because he's a young up and coming player in this league. So they have avenues to clear cap space, and I think a lot of it does start with what do you do with some of these aging veterans, and it's unfortunate
Yeah.
again as we've already talked about ad nauseum, but I think that's going to be a big part of it. We're going to see a lot of new faces on this defense, hopefully with the new defensive coordinator, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely. And it did seem like obviously we have to do something with that. And that combined with how they took the idea of being faster. I don't know if they said specifically on defense. Everybody in the world, even them, knew that's what they're thinking about, and that's what they meant. Was because our defense looks so slow all year long. Really, we want to blame Ed Donatel all the time, but our defense looked slow. And in this game in particular, so there's no question that we have to be faster. And then I think that kind of, starts with the vets and replacing them, especially when you got guys like we're going to talk about next. I'll just say Asamoah, who is so fast. And every time we see him, you can just tell. And there's just that feeling like, all right, he's ready to take the Ryans. We didn't get to see it exactly like that this year, which they also did mention. Just because they just wanted to make sure his development, it wasn't the best choice for his development to push him in there right away. So next year we might see it. But as far as Daniil Hunter, that I guess that would be like the one player of all these vets that I would most likely want to stick around just because he's 28. He's not past that 30 years old thing. And plus, obviously, finding edge rushers isn't and a really good edge rushers isn't the most easy thing to do. But we'll see. We'll talk more about that too as the off season rolls out.
Yeah. But that was one of the questions is how, like they asked Kwesi, how does he evaluate his rookie class? And obviously he talked about the circumstances with the injuries. So he said a lot of the guys were contributors on special teams. They got to show some of their stuff late in games. Look at Jalen Naylor against the Packers and against the Bears. Then he also mentioned just having vets in front of you. Like you mentioned, Brian Osmoa,
Right.
obviously great special teamer, got in there a little bit later on in the season. But for the most part, Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks got playing time in front of him. So, he mentioned, and then he, obviously saying he thought this was going to be kind of a 2-year draft class almost. He said, because last year it was a much bigger class than people thought we were going to have. And this year with the few picks we have, he's like, it's kind of feels like it's an extended draft class almost to where we'll get to see a lot of these guys that didn't get a chance to play this last season, maybe alluding to cutting some of these veterans,
Hmm.
are going to be back next year and they're going to have bigger roles and they're going to have to show us what they can do. So, really interesting comments when he talking about his draft class and kind of his idea as he goes forward because they asked him about his few draft picks and he said
It's hard to
a big
tell
part of it
this
was
year.
last year because he traded away future assets
Right.
like to get TJ Hawkinson and
Right.
to
Right.
move up to get a Caleb Evans and get some of these other guys. That's
Hmm.
what he said was a big thing about this draft class. He felt like it was going to be one of those like 2-year deals where they're like getting picks, a lot of players you like in your first draft, and then next year having fewer picks, but still being able to find the most out of those, which he's going to do because he's a Wall Street genius. So
Yeah, which I still love about Kwesi too. Is just man, every time he talks about math, he just everything is about so math oriented and statistics and all that stuff, which I just think is super sick. At least it just like makes you think like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing, at least from a number standpoint for sure. Um, but yeah, man, that's one. It was a really unfortunate season for him as far as his draft class goes. With two of his probably the most hyped players. They were the first two picks, right? Yeah,
yeah,
seen in his first two picks ever, and seen in Booth, and barely got to, definitely didn't get to see anything from Seen, but barely got to see anything from Booth and a lot of his players. Obviously, they got to see some good stuff from Naylor and Asamoah and a Caleb Evans. A Caleb Evans would end up going to injury. He was a player that they were going to get the most view on, I guess, and then we just didn't see enough Naylor and Asamoah to get there's some excitement out of that, but we'll see what happens with
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But yeah, that was kind of unfortunate for them. So it is kind of hard question for them to answer, but
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what they do
yeah,
going
for
into
sure.
this draft.
So obviously a lot of talk, not a lot of answers, but we did get a few nuggets. Those were our thoughts on some of the things that they had mentioned in their press conference. We want to know your guys' thoughts. Let us know what you thought of their press conference down in the comment section, and we'll see you guys next time on the GG Sports Podcast.
Skol Vikes.